The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowski.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be back again with you today. And we have a very special guest, Kurt Grant, who actually just blew me away a few minutes ago. He has sent me two books, Shiny Side Up on the Road to Recovery and Transition Adjusting to Life After the Uniform. And then when I asked him how many books you had, he told me he's got more than 20 books. So I know how hard it is to write, and this gives me an idea of what a hard worker our retired Sergeant Kurt Grant is. He's a Canadian military veteran. He retired, I believe, 9 years ago at 55 after 34 years in the military. And he has his own story of what it is like to work through the barriers and stigma of PTSD following service and finding a way to navigate through a pathway towards your own recovery. So it is not an easy pathway, and most people who know my work understand that I've spent years working with military, veterans, first responders, and this thing about taking off your uniform and being able to move into civilian life happens to be something that is a great, great challenge. So I want to thank you so much, Kurt, for joining us today. I'm looking forward to hearing about more about your books, about the transition that you took, about your journey in general. So welcome, and thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. I just want to remind our wonderful listeners that if you have any questions, or if you want to make a comment, you know how to get in touch with us, instudio101@gmail.com. And we love hearing from you because it keeps that conversation very lively. So let's get into it. Kurt, can you tell me, first of all, a little bit about these more than 20 books that you've written and how you're using writing as part of your journey?
Well, writing came to me, actually I fell into writing when I first got serious about it when I went on tour back in 95 or 94 to Yugoslavia. I felt that it was important that I kept a diary, since Yugo at the time was the worst shooting match that Canada had been involved in since Korea. And if something were to happen to me somewhere along the line, I wanted to have a sort of a day by day, blow by blow event of what was a record of what I was going through, so that they knew what I was getting into. That book eventually became All Tigers, No Donkeys. And it took me 6 years to work through that and finally get it to a publisher and have it published. And turned out to be one of only 5 books that were written about the Yugoslav experience. Since right after that, I was hired at the Directorate History and Heritage as a researcher and writer. And uh, the job that I was hired into was to research Canadian operations. At the time, in the early 2000s, nobody had a comprehensive list of all the operations that Canada had been involved in since the Second World War. So my job, along with another major, was to do all the basic research and compile histories of, or brief histories of each event. From that job, I was hired over to the Canadian Army Warfare Center, where I became the managing editor of the Army Journal. And I had to do historical writing, biographies, articles. I wrote an article about the designated marksmanship and the value it brought to the front lines versus snipers. And from there, by then my career basically crashed. My PTSD was getting to the point where it was out of control.
So that's when
And
we start looking at around 2011, right? Because I read.
Around 2011, yeah.
I've,
And
go ahead.
then by 2014, I was forced to retire. And from there, I started. The first thing I did was get on my motorcycle and drove across Canada,
Well,
trying
let's
to find
talk a
some
little bit
clarity.
about the inspiration to that motorcycle trip, because I know there are a couple of references, and it seems to me like you've used your motorcycle, like your writing maybe, as a
Yep.
way of kind of grounding into your life and making sense of your world. And you reference Robert Fulton's 1932
Yep.
book,
Hmm.
1932, where this guy goes on a journey. The book is called One Man Caravan,
Yep.
and it's this inspiring experience which came about in a way that probably is quite unexpected. And as I recall from the book, he was sitting at a dinner table and having a conversation with a woman, and
Never
the
try to impress a woman.
yeah, he's trying to impress this woman, and the conversation is overheard by the owner of Douglas Motor, who
Yep.
offers a motorcycle to Robert Fulton to take a fantastic 22 country adventure, and then it led to the book One Man
Yeah.
Caravan. Now, I'd really be curious to understand what it was like for you to read the book and how it led to the inspiration, how it changed your life.
Well, reading the book was interesting. There was so much about it that I could relate to, but the the idea of taking a journey like that uh, sort of resonated with me. Um, I'll be honest with you, when I got on my motorcycle, I, I didn't, I wasn't, I haven't been a motorcycle rider my whole life. In my late 40s, a friend of mine drove up to the house, on his bike, and I thought, you know what, I'd like to do that. So I just went out and bought a bike, and it took a while, but I got my feet underneath me and screwed up the courage to take it out for a ride, and decided that I liked it. And but it's not enough just to have a bike to run from one Tim Hortons to another. You have to do something with it, right? So driving across Canada, I had been forced into retirement. I was psychologically I was a mess, and I needed some time on my own just sort of to clear my head. And the idea of of driving across Canada really struck a chord with me. So I just made the decision and went.
Mm. Now, there's a couple of things that you just mentioned. One is just the realization that we can get our inspiration and our healing from, many different places. So
Absolutely, yeah.
because I work with so many people with PTSD, and it's really the kind of the core of my work,
Mhm.
I have pretty consistently found that the people who do the best are willing to change up their lives, or onboard activities that they wouldn't have considered.
I think the answer you're looking for is buying in. I
Hmm.
know a lot of guys who have gone to Homewood and Bellwood and whatnot and have been there two, three, four times and still fail to put into action the lessons that they learn in those institutions. You have to buy into the process. You have to make a decision at some point that says, I don't want to live my life like this anymore, and I want to do something about it. And the road to recovery is an extraordinarily long one. And a lot of it depends entirely on how willing you are to accept that you're not that guy anymore. You're not the guy that can, used to be able to carry a 100-pound pack and for a 10-mile walk or whatever. You're broken. You don't have the intellectual capacity that, or not intellectual, the emotional capacity that you used to have. And it takes a long time to push out and discover where your edges are. What are your triggers? What are the things that affect you? Why do you get angry all the time? Why am I depressed? Well, you got to buy into the process and figure that out. You have to face your demons. And if you don't do that, if you don't step up, they will continually beat you over the head. And you'll just go around in circles. I know a lot of guys who identify themselves as having PTSD. That's the limit of where they go. And they
So
just
they'll know
cycle
they
around.
have it, but they're then not willing to lean toward it and really do the deep inner work. And I really appreciate the fact that you said the road to recovery is long, because I think one of the things that people, obviously, we would hope for it, that there's some kind of magic pill or an instant fix. And with PTSD, that is not the case. And it's so humbling because I think, especially if you're really strong and you've always known yourself as capable, then
Hmm.
to struggle with PTSD and to be bombarded with the intrusive thoughts and the devastating physiological feelings and sensations, it is a humbling and hard experience, and it does require this recognition. Yeah, this is the heavy lifting, this is the hard work, and what that really looks like.
It's very interesting. In the research I've done over the years and through my own journey, it's become clear that guys in particular, well, I'll say I was stubborn. It was 15 years. It took me 15 years to come to what I call the holy Jesus moment. I had to write off my car to discover that when I went to buy the new car, there was absolutely no emotion. I was flat as a pancake. I walked into the dealership. I said, I'll take that one right there. Took it out for a drive and said, yep, let's do this. And it was the first brand new car I ever bought.
Mm,
And I just had no emotion, none at all.
mm,
And then I got a call from my doctor. And he said, why don't you come in? I just want to go over your file. I sat in the doctor's office, and it was a young PA who was filling in, and he introduced himself, and I looked at him. I said, "Who the fuck are you, and what are you? Why am I here?" And he handed me a little piece of paper and says, "Why don't you fill this out for me?" And it was a depression scale. I scored 34 out of 40 on it. And he says, I got a couple of people I want you to talk to. And it was 15 years from my tour to when I was finally diagnosed. And along that way, I always thought that, holy crap, I can deal with this. I got it. I just need a little bit more time to sort my shit out. I just need, you know, I don't want to be a burden to anyone around me. So I'm just going to keep this to myself and it's going to work my way through it.
Kurt,
Didn't work out that way.
you're mentioning something that I hear from a lot of veterans and first responders, mostly people who are wearing uniforms,
Yes.
or people who are doing kind of real clear service work,
Yeah.
even, the staff in hospitals, I hear this kind of a similar thing. But definitely, ambulance, fire, police, military, paramilitary.
People who
And what
run
I
towards the
hear,
fire.
sorry, what I hear is I'm going to have to keep going. I'm going to buckle down and I'm going to keep going. And there's this inner kind of determination and force to carry on and to push through. And even when you're already injured,
Mm.
that push is really, really strong, but it doesn't last forever, that push, that determination. What was happening in the background, do you think, for you, Kurt, that kept you pushing through even though you knew you were suffering?
Well, there's two things. One is, well, three things. Now that you mention it, the first is we all have an image of who we are. The perfect soldier, the perfect cop, the perfect EMS, fireman, whatever. We're the hero in our own minds. The second is I the sense of service that drives us to do what we do means that the overriding characteristic is that we will gladly put our problems aside in order to help those around us.
That
And I
is
see,
such a beautiful thing to say, Kurt, and it is
yes,
so undervalued in our
yeah,
culture. So I'm going to just say this. Thank you for your service. I have to have you understand how much I value what you've done as a military member and what you put forward into the world to make a difference. And I don't think our military, our paramilitary hear it clearly enough, but boy, oh boy, it always hits me right in the heart because I hear these stories and I am constantly impressed and humbled by what people put into these roles and how much we need you,
mm.
right?
Well, the sense of service stems from the difference between a job and a profession. If most of us that are in this field, who, at least from my generation, um, and we can talk a little bit about that later, but my generation saw, like my father's generation, had maybe five or six, maybe eight choices in life. They could go back to the farm, they could go into a trade, they could go into the government if they had an education, or they could, if they were lucky, they could actually go to post-secondary school, or they just carried on working at the local mill or whatever. In my generation, we were expected to change jobs 7 times.
Mm.
Today's generation, 7 gets you through the first 4 years of your, actually the first year of your employment. You know, it's really quite different. When I said we have an image, create, when we dedicate ourselves to a profession, be it soldier, sailor, whatever the profession, doctor, lawyer, we give all of ourselves to it. And that then forms our self image and it feeds on itself, that cycle back and forth. I do this because I'm the best that I'm going to be. And that's where we willingly put aside our family lives. We willingly put aside our personal troubles in order to live up to the self-image that we have of ourselves. And in my case, it was just uh, as a man, I didn't have the vocabulary to actually express what was going on inside me. This is a big issue. When someone says, "Well, what are you thinking about?" I'm generally not thinking about anything. That's called the nothing box. It's a unique trait that all men have that women don't understand. But that said, it's I get stuck into loops. Um, a cognitive loop. I used to get in the car, and the first thing I would do is start thinking about money. Where's my paycheck going to go? How am I going to break it down? And it's a dopamine loop, and it was the only way I could see to get my way home. Being dedicated to a profession strips away the noise around you.
Mm.
And like I say, even the guys, I've gone to a lot of these Wounded Warrior weekend type things, and it didn't matter who I was talking to. If I had a problem, there was more than enough guys there to reach out and say, well, how can I help? It didn't matter that we all had problems. They put their stuff aside in order to help me. Have you considered this? Have you considered that? It's what actually led me into peer support where I am now.
Yeah, there is such a need for that, because there's that sense of, I know what that's like. I've seen that, I've heard it,
Yeah,
and
very
I've
much.
felt it. And so you can only come with your own honesty. I want to read some of our emails, which are coming in quickly, and just give you a sense of what people are thinking about or commenting.
Sure.
Um, so this is from Grace, who says, wow, all of those books amazing. God bless this man, Grace. Now, I also think it's pretty remarkable because, as I said, I know what it's like to write, and it's a big task. So can you tell people how many books you've written?
Well, that's
Have you lost
um,
count?
I've lost count, to be perfectly honest with you. I've got a dozen on my uh, computer screen here. The got at least 8 published books. Um, I've got a series of 9, which are warrior tales, and I want to speak a bit about that. It's because this generation of veterans has to tell their stories.
Mm.
The problem is, like, I used writing as a form of therapy. It was because I had done so much writing early in my career, it was suggested that I return to writing and use it as a way of working through issues. So, as I mentioned, I've been on these weekend getaways with other veterans, and they would tell me these stories about what they had gone through. And to highlight why I do this, I was at one event up in northern Saskatchewan, and we had civilian drivers take us from one place to another, and guys would pile in and they'd start talking, they'd be shooting the shit back and forth, and they would tell these wild stories. Oh yeah, well, this is what guys do, right? They have this competition who can have the most interesting story. The drivers initially started out to be really, really chatty. After the first half a day, they stopped talking. Not a single driver would comment. They would just drive you where you went, and all they would do is listen. And finally, one of us spoke up and said, "Listen, what's going on, guys? I mean, you used to be interactive with us." And they said, "Well, listen, we got together the first day, and we, as a group, decided that, or agreed that we couldn't believe the stories you were telling. The stuff that you had experienced is so far outside of our experience that we have no way of relating to it. The other thing was, we haven't heard anybody talk like this since our grandfathers.
Hmm.
So all we wanted to do was listen." So what did that mean to me? That meant there was a time in this country where virtually everybody had somebody that they knew who had served. Today, that's less than 1%. So if our veterans don't tell their stories, they'll be lost to time. So I was fortunate. I went through Yugoslavia. It was all over the news. People got interested in that. So when my book came out, it sold quite well. The other side of that, though, is that there aren't many stories or many books out there that tell stories about what went on in Afghanistan or the 875 other operations that have taken place since 1945. So one of the books I'm writing is a series. The series that I'm writing is called Warrior Tales. And the purpose is to tell short stories, take the reader into a tour and expose them to what the types of situations that our soldiers have to encounter. Why is that important? Because you need to appreciate the kind of stress that we have to deal with. It's one thing to say, go over there and be a peacekeeper. It's quite another to go over and duck rounds from a 16-year-old kid, that should be in school.
Yeah, these
So,
are the stories that, I mean, I'll say it again. I do a lot of work with veterans, so
yeah.
I really, really appreciate what you're saying, that there's a lack of deep knowledge
Mm,
of what it really means to be a military member or a
mm,
veteran. I'm so glad you're writing that. Kurt, maybe you'll come back to us when you've finished that book, whether
mhm.
it's professionally published or self-published. We would love to hear some of those stories and understand them through your lens. Let me read some more of this because I
Yeah,
want to
sure.
make sure we get through. We have quite a stack of interested people who are listening to this. And I'll just say, I don't know what our numbers are now, but we were something like 3 to 4,500 live listeners for this show. So, oh my goodness, I have to thank every one of you out there who are listening because it's such a wonderful thing to be able to share these incredible authors with you. And of course, with Kurt today. This is from Jim, who says, I can only imagine what these men and women in uniform go through. I cannot imagine. Thanks to Grant for all that you are doing. So that's just a little comment,
Oh,
Kurt, that you should receive that. And then
thank you.
this one is from Frank, who says, what advice does Kurt have for us vets, the best? How do we cope? And I want to just make one mention, Frank, because I found that in transition, which I would really recommend, if you're asking that question, Frank, I would really encourage you to pick up a copy of Transition Adjusting to Life After the Uniform. How do people best get a copy of this, Kurt?
It's available on Amazon.
On Amazon. Fantastic. So what I
You may
want
have
to
to dig a
recommend,
little bit for it,
you
but
have
it's
to dig.
there.
Okay, no problem. We could probably get my team to put a link
Yeah.
up if you would like us to do that, if you
Yes,
think that
please.
would be helpful. So I will ask Jenna to do that for us. But you did an amazing job in transition. Pages 81 forward, and you write about slowing down, reinventing yourself, walking away, cleaning out your closet, selling your mess kit, cleaning out your basement, making new friends. Can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about those things?
Well, here's the thing about being in a profession, particularly the military. The military is like um, an organism within the Canadian society. We are self sustaining in every way, shape, and form. We see the outside world, we partake of the outside world, but we do not participate in the outside world. And the reason we don't is because we may be put on a week long exercise, we may be deployed on a TAV somewhere, We may end up being deployed or just simply posted. So any commitment we make to, say, the local hockey league or whatever club that you're involved in, you just yoink yourself out of that and you leave a hole. So for that reason, we don't actually participate in the environment. When you retire, you're no longer part of that organism. You're just one more face in a crowd. You've stripped away all of your identity. Within the military, you may have been a legend, if not in your own mind, then amongst your peers. But when you step outside, you're just another old guy. You're just another guy who's walking the streets like everybody else. And you have to learn a whole new skill set. And the hardest thing and the first thing you have to do is admit to yourself that you're not that guy anymore. You're not that legend that person that was in your head your whole life. I lived my life as a senior NCO following the 10 leadership principles. Know yourself and know your strengths and weaknesses and seek self-improvement. Know your troops and promote their welfare. Lead by example, never pass a fault. These are all simple statements, but they resonate in my head every day and they affect all the actions that I take. That stays with me and it affects how I interact with other people. But I hold myself to a standard as a result of that. And that standard sometimes makes it difficult to interact with local people or with civilians because they don't have those standards. They would rather talk around a problem than talk to the problem. And this is one of the root issues with one of the things I think that veterans bring to the table that is truly beneficial and it comes from orders group. Everybody knows who's in charge. The plan's been laid out. So when they go around the table and say questions, you're expected to address that little piece of the plan that affects you. You're not expected to talk about the problem all over again. And I have sat in more meetings than I can shake a stick at where people, all they do is they rehash things because they want to hear themselves talk. So the strength that we bring is discipline and focus and the ability to address issues directly. And this is so looping back to buy-in. The strength that every veteran has in his capacity, in his training, is the ability to see a problem, to assess the risk, to address the issues and develop a plan to move forward. And buying into the fact that you're not that guy anymore means that you need to come up with a new way of reinventing yourself.
Yeah, and that was actually really interesting when I read in your book this idea that, yes, you're retired or maybe you're heading in that direction or you have to take a role that isn't what it was before. And yet, you still have all this training and all this energy and you need to put it into something that reinvent yourself piece seemed like a really pivotal piece of your book.
Well, look, most of us in the military are responsible for hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment. We've led troops, we've interacted as critical members of teams. Cutting the grass is an important thing to do, or shoveling the driveway is very important, but it doesn't engage you intellectually. And the truth is, if you retire in your late 40s, early 50s, maybe late 50s, most of us are going to live well into our 80s. And 30 years of sitting on the porch watching the locals walk by is no way to live a life. At least that's my personal opinion. For some people, I see a lot of people around here do that, and I'm sorry, that's not me. I've always been a kinetic individual. I've always moved forward, decided I was going to do something and went and did it.
And that kind of fits in with your motorcycle riding that
Yeah.
kinetic piece. And I just want to mention this for our listeners that not everybody has that action gene in a way. I'll
Yeah.
tell you, Kurt, many years ago, I was riding motorcycle myself, and
Mhm.
I am a pretty petite person. But it is one of those experiences that puts you into the moment like almost nothing else can. And you reference in your book, the 2019 book, Zen means absorption or a meditative state to let go of the day's troubles. You're referencing it, and I'm thinking about how that combination of the full-on kinetic, but also the high focus, and what that did for you during your ride. And this actually hooks into Ralph's email. And Ralph is saying, I'm a Gulf War vet. There's nothing like wind therapy. So can you address this idea of the kinetic and the meditation piece?
Okay. Uh, there is in the book. There's a Japanese word. The Japanese seem to have a word for everything, but this one is ikagai. Essentially, it means man and horse as one. When you get on a motorcycle, you must be totally present all the time. You're always anticipating what's coming ahead of you. But there is a separation between presence and your your thought processes. You may be physically present. You may be the connection with your bike is right there, and with your environment. But for me, riding a motorcycle is processing time. It allows my subconscious to work through issues that's on my mind at the time or whatever, uh, while enjoying the physical experience of the temperature changing every 20 feet or so, or the smell of changing as you drive down the road. Um, I was scared to death when I got on my motorcycle to drive across Canada. I drove from Brockville to halfway to Arnprior or to Smith Falls, and I had to stop twice just to adjust my equipment. After 43 days on the road, it was nothing for me to drive 700 kilometers during a day. There were two requirements for a stop. One was usually about every 150 to 200 kilometers. The reason was my butt would usually go to sleep and I had to get off the bike to stretch my legs. And gas. I needed gas. I could get, maybe two stops in before I had to fill up the tank again. The idea, the bike and I at that point had become one. I got on it. It was like home. I didn't have to think about where things were. I just got on and drove. And that allowed the freedom for my mind to just think about other things while I was doing what I was doing. And that's where the true value, I think, of motorcycle riding, in this case, motorcycle riding is. It's you are totally in the present. You don't think about the future. You don't think about the past. You're not, you can't ride when you're angry. You have to be right there all the time. And and Zen is any activity that separates you from the awareness of the passage of time. So if I tie flies, I love tying flies. I can sit here all day and do it. But I'm also a fly fisherman, and anybody out there who's a fisherman will tell you that they can spend all day watching a little bobber go down the water, and everything else is gone. They're just watching that little bobber, waiting for it to dip, and that's Zen. That's the essence of Zen. And it doesn't have to be mystical or magical or anything like that. It's just the awareness or the lack of the awareness of the passage of time.
Oh, yeah, beautiful. This is from Ray, who says, um, what can the world actually do to help folks like Kurt?
Wow, good question.
Yeah, it
The
is.
short the short answer is be aware. Uh, Again, this is one of the reasons why I'm writing these books, is because this Warrior Tale series, because I'm putting you into the actual events that have taken place. Nobody, I think, in the military is looking for a parade. But here's, in general terms, when the Second World War veterans came home, everybody celebrated the fact that they had done a good job. Virtually the entire country was involved in the Second World War. That changed during Vietnam. A lot of people don't know, for instance, that we sent 4 full battalions, which is more than 4,000 troops from the Canadian Army over to Vietnam. And they had transferred to the American Army. Some of them fought as units, some of them were integrated with other units. When I went overseas in 1995, everybody was saying, "Oh my God, Canada's a peacekeeping nation. Go over there and make a difference." I was gone for a year. Nobody knew I had left. And here's the big thing. When I started to talk about it, nobody was interested.
Hmm.
They were more interested in the fact that, guess what? The road hasn't been plowed this week, or the garbage is late being picked up. And, what about these taxes and all that kind of stuff? Their world is so insular that a lot of veterans, when they come home, they sit and say, well, are you not looking beyond your little world to see what's going on out there? And I can quote statistics up the hoop. At the
Yeah, no,
end of the day,
I agree with you 100% that not everybody looks at geopolitics, which is a topic I'm very interested in
yeah,
because, this is our
yeah,
world.
it is our world.
But I think that's a really important thing that you're raising, that somehow, our those people who are serving should not then become invisible, but we need to actually recognize this really crucial service. I mean, we live in North America and we experience a tremendous amount of freedoms because of what the military has done in generations before, and what that has meant for North America, and we should not forget. I'm going to go to Cindy, who's asking, are these books available online or in stores? And Cindy, I want to make sure that you'll be able to find some of Kurt's books. So you already said it's on Amazon, but
Mhm.
are there other locations that are selling the books?
Not right now.
Okay.
The book, getting a book into a store anywhere in Canada is a challenge, even on a good day.
It
Uh,
is, for sure it is. And so what we're going to do on our end, Kurt, is I'm going to get my staff to put some links on our site
okay.
to make sure that people can find it at Bear Psychology. For anybody who's going on to the website, you'll be able to find it on Bear Psychology, and very, very specifically in our resource
Hmm.
section, you'll see that the radio show is the first drop down. And you'll be able to pull up the link from Healing from Wounds No One Sees, from Military to Motorcycle. And Jenna, thank you. She's the one. Jenna and Usha will be the ones to put up the links for us, so you'll be able to find it there. And thanks for the question, Cindy. We want to make sure that you get some of those. Now, this is from Eric, who's asking, are you from the US or Canadian military? And you're listening from Denver, Colorado. And thank you very much for joining us today, Eric. Do you want to talk about where your military experience is from, Kurt?
I'm a Canadian veteran. I grew up in a military family, so I actually grew up on a Bomark base. For those of you who don't know, that's an intercontinental ballistic missile that Canada had. I was then, Dad was posted over to Germany, so we were part of the NATO Defense Forces in Germany. We came back to Canada, and I've served I've deployed 7 times on various taskings, once to a war zone. So for me, my military career has been, uh, you know, my whole life, basically. I've been down to the States on training events and that type of thing as well.
Yeah, wow. This is from Mary, who is asking, she says, hello, Kurt. Hello, Anna. I know that Kurt has an opinion on medical cannabis. What is that opinion?
For veterans with PTSD, I see it as medicine, and there is a reason for that. The medical evidence suggests that there is the response to trauma or traumatic event has an impact on the limbic system. And cannabis allows for reprogramming of the neural pathways. As well, I feel the same way about magic mushrooms. Some of the ketamine treatments that are out there. Ayahuasca is another one. Peyote, though that's limited to the indigenous community. There's the use of non-traditional, I'll call it, medicines in the treatment of PTSD is growing. And it is growing because it is having an enormous positive impact. The one I would recommend, a book I would recommend, is How to Change Your Mind. Was written at sort of walks you through the impact of medicines such as cannabis and ketamine and magic mushrooms and whatnot. And I've done quite a bit of reading on it, so I'm quite positive in the support of medical marijuana, as long as it's used to treat symptoms rather than avoid dealing with your issues.
So just to pick up on what you're saying about all of these alternative approaches or psychedelic approaches, some of them are available in Canada, some of them are not. Like we have ketamine assisted therapies that are approved here in Canada off-label. But all of the other ones that you mentioned, unless they're part of a research study, they're not available in Canada. And I think this is the same in the US, that you can get ketamine-assisted therapies in the US and not any of these other ones. Of course, people can get marijuana here and in the US as well. And work with a skilled therapist who knows how to guide you and work with you within these substances, because one of the things about all of these substances is that they free up the mind and emotional and mental rigidity to allow access to some of those wounded places that are very well concealed and contained. And certainly, there's more and more research that's showing that these alternative therapeutics can be very beneficial, especially if you've got intractable symptoms. And that's what the research is showing. I've got some more now. This is from Dawn. Dawn, thank you very much for the email. Kurt is so right. Our men and ladies in uniform are trained and taught how to do things a certain way and when and why to do them. After years of that training and that mind control, it has to be exceptionally hard to maintain a normal life in the outside world. I cannot imagine how these folks do it. What are your thoughts?
Well, I can tell you that 70% of veterans, and I would actually expand that quite a bit, to other professions rather than jobs, struggle with the transition from being a professional, as say a professional soldier, to becoming a civilian. 70%. And that means they have troubles making friends, interacting. They talk directly, they talk aggressively. And while within our profession that is normal, because it's a time issue. It seems that everyone we encounter is worried about offending somebody. So this is where a lot of guys start to retreat within themselves and isolate themselves. And that's how do we do it? Well, badly. I'll be perfectly honest with you. But I would also point something else out. Let's take on average every year, 10,000 troops retire from the military. If we just use that as a benchmark, of those, we know that less than 25% will have access or will make access to Veterans Affairs Canada for whatever reason, for a claim of some sort. Of those 25%, less than 5% will have issues with psychological issues. And that's to say that while we lose 10,000 troops who retire every year, the vast majority of them will go on to live absolutely normal lives. We're putting an awful lot of emphasis on the fact that there are guys like me out there. Now, according to Veterans Affairs, I'm 136% broken. You do the math, it's government math, so I'll just leave it at that. But the long and short is that, yes, I've struggled for a very long time to overcome my demons and deal with my issues. I'm now on the post-traumatic growth phase. I'm actually stronger than I used to be. That said, a lot of guys get stuck in between. And I remember I said earlier that some people identify themselves as having PTSD and they just don't, they're stuck in a loop there.
Now, or they're self-medicating, or they're doing all sorts of things to not really, cope with it. So it's interesting that your stats, Kurt, were very interesting for me to listen to, because, what I see sometimes are veterans who, for 20 years after retirement, they've never received any kind of care. They've never sought it out. And the only reason that they're seeking it out is because things have become so impossible for them that their lives are falling apart. So I think a lot of people just go underground because there's shame and there's, self-blame.
Well, it's a self-defense mechanism, right? It's a survival mechanism. This is one of the things isolation is a survival mechanism because you cannot deal with the outside world, so you isolate. There was an interesting study that came out of the United States, Chicago specifically. They surveyed 15,000 police officers who retired over a 40-year period. The average lifespan was a year and a half post-retirement. Wow. Now, the average civilian is expected to live 30-some years. Within the RCMP, the average lifespan has been estimated at about 8 years. Now, this is where we come back to talking about transition. This idea that you have to reinvent yourself, that you have to go back to baseline. Now, remember, you joined when you were an 18 or a 20-year-old. The world you left behind is not the world that you're stepping into. So there is an awful big learning curve there. And accepting, there are two types of grief. There's the grief that is associated with loss of identity, but there's also an ambiguous grief that you can rarely put your hand on. And what that refers to is you're coming to the realization that one thing that you had set your hopes and dreams on will never be accomplished. You're never going to sail around the world on a boat. You're never going to fly an airplane across the Atlantic. You're never going to do this. You're never going to do that. And it's the realization that you're now too old to do it, or that you just don't have it in you to do it. And that grief can't be easily dealt with unless it's excised. It's brought out into the open and you talk about it. And this is where the value of peer support comes in. It's I got what's referred to as lived experience. And what that is I crashed, I went through the medical system, I recovered, and now I'm on my post-traumatic growth phase. So I can sit with you and I can say, yeah, you know what? When I was like that, I was suicidal. I walked into the house one day, my wife said, would you take out the garbage? And all I wanted to do was go out and hang myself. So I've been at the lowest possible end and I've worked my way out of that. And that's incredibly important to be able to face your demons and say, okay, how do we deal with this? How do I get better? So transition is an extremely difficult thing for a lot of guys to do because men in general don't have the vocabulary to express what they're feeling. It's just who we are. It's the way we're raised, and we're getting better at it. The younger generation is much better than my generation and or Gen X generation, but it's still a process. You still have to buy into it. You still have to be willing to say, okay, I need help. And when it comes to the civilian side of the house, the best thing you can do is listen.
Mm-hmm.
Just take the time to sit down and hear what the guy is trying to say.
It's beautiful.
And there you have it.
I want to just read through a couple of more emails where we've got literally 3.5 minutes left.
Yep.
So it's a fast interview, goes quickly, Kurt. Thank you. This one's from Brett, and he says, this is such a great show today. People do not realize what these men and women go through for freedom, peace, and stability. They deserve the world. End of story. I agree with that. Nice to hear it. This is from Tina, who says, hello, a fellow veteran here. May I ask what type of bike Kurt has? Just curious.
I just sold my, I drove across Canada on a Vulcan Voyager. I T-boned a guy outside of Winnipeg and rode it off, and I replaced it with a Vulcan Nomad. I've replaced that now. I'm currently driving a V-Strom 650. And the reason I'm driving it is because I'm 65 and it weighs 450 pounds. And if it falls over, I can at least pick it up. Whereas the Vulcan Voyager weighed 900 pounds. And when I put my kit on it, it was nearly 1,000 pounds. And if it fell over, I needed 2 men, a team of horses, and a small band of midgets to help get it off the ground.
Listen, Kurt, we have literally 1.5 minutes to go.
Yeah.
I want to know, is there something that I didn't ask or our listeners didn't comment on or say or ask? I just want to make sure you get the last word. We have actually still a pile of emails. I'm so sorry to our listeners who didn't get their emails read today, but it's been an active show. Tell me, Kurt, what do we need to hear from you in closing?
It's difficult to make transition, no matter what profession you're in, be it lawyer, clergy, soldier, sailor, whatever. Be willing to reinvent yourself. That's the first step. But more importantly, reach out. And I know that's a difficult thing to say. It's for those of you that struggle with any kind of mental illness, find somebody you can trust and talk to them. This is where peer support comes in. If you've got a veteran somewhere in your family, take the time to listen to their stories, because what that does is it validates their experience. We live in a fast-paced world, and I know how hard that is. But some of the things most of the guys, they struggle with what's called culture shock. You know, our society is one of the top is the top society in the world. We have indoor plumbing, we've got a roof over our head, we've got medical systems, we've got police systems, all that kind of stuff. 80% of the world doesn't live like that. And until you get outside your environment, you don't realize that. So when you send young men and women off to another country like Somalia or Rwanda, and they come back disillusioned, take the time to listen, hear the stories that they're telling, and buy my book when it comes out.
We're going to get that up on the website. Kurt,
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for joining us. It has been wonderful. When you've got that warrior book out, will you
Yeah.
please get back in touch with us? It's
Absolutely.
really great, the work you're doing. I appreciate it so much. And you know, we can be in touch back channel. Be well. Thank you everyone for joining us again today, and I look forward to our continued conversation. Take care of yourself. Bye.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with your host, Dr. Anna Baranowski, right here on Reality Radio 101.